The Nevada sun scorched the desert flats around Red Mesa Range, the air shimmering above rust-colored sand and steel targets. From a dust-coated pickup stepped Ethan Cole, a man of 68 with weathered skin, grey hair cropped short, and a gaze steady as iron. His movements were deliberate, the kind of slow precision learned from years behind a scope. Slung across his back was an old wooden case, its brass latch dented and scarred like its owner. He carried it as one might carry a memory, carefully, almost tenderly. A few paces behind him walked Maya Cole, his only daughter, 21, tall and athletic, yet uneasy in her faded denim jacket. Her dark brown hair was tied into a loose braid, and her green eyes darted nervously between her father and the crowd. She had begged him not to come to this Veterans Day shootout, afraid the modern crowd with their polymer rifles and digital optics would laugh. When she saw several phones lifted toward them, she felt heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and guilt for feeling that way about her own father. At Ethan's heel-padded ghost, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick grey coat and amber eyes that missed nothing. The dog moved silently, his tail low but alert, the posture of a creature born to guard. Ethan reached down and brushed the animal's ear, murmuring, "Easy, boy." Ghost's presence seemed to steady him. Together, they formed an unspoken unit, man and beast, moving as if by the same heartbeat. Maya glanced at them and realized, not for the first time, that her father seemed more comfortable with that dog than with people. The laughter started near the registration tent. A group of young shooters in matching tan uniforms watched Ethan open his case. Inside lay a heavy pistol unlike anything on their sleek tables. Matte steel worn to silver, its barrel extended, a custom scope bolted above. One of the men, a freckled kid barely 20, whispered loudly, "Look at that antique. Did he build it in the Stone Age?" Phones recorded, live streams flickered. Emojis of laughter flooded screens. Maya's stomach twisted. Ethan only wiped dust from the weapon with a cloth, every stroke calm, precise, ritualistic. The sun flashed along the etched words, Nomad 2. Ethan lifted the gun, testing the weight, and for a moment the noise faded. In that silence he saw a blur of the past, the recoil of gunfire echoing through desert streets overseas, the faces of men he couldn't save, the smoke curling from rooftops. He blinked, steadying his breath. Maya reached out, her voice soft. "Dad, maybe we don't have to do this." He smiled faintly, lines deepening at the corners of his mouth. "We do, sweetheart," he said. "Some things you stop running from by facing them again." Around them, the laughter returned, but Ethan heard only the wind, and in its whisper, the old rhythm of his pulse. The late morning heat shimmered above the Nevada desert, bending the air like glass around the steel targets scattered across Red Mesa Range. Dust rolled lazily with each gust, clinging to boots and gunmetal. The crowd of shooters stirred when a tall man in a tan tactical uniform walked toward Ethan's lane. Lieutenant Brett Lawson, 35, had sharp, almost sculpted features, a jawline shadowed by stubble, and a confident gait that drew eyes wherever he went. His hair was clipped high, his sleeves rolled to reveal forearms veined and taut. There was authority in every motion, but also something brittle, an edge honed by frustration. Once a promising sniper in Afghanistan, Brett's career ended abruptly when shrapnel tore through his knee, leaving behind a limp too slight for sympathy but too deep for pride. That wound festered in his ego, turning discipline into arrogance. "You here to show us relics from the museum, sir?" he asked, smirking, his voice smooth but coated in scorn. Ethan didn't look up immediately. He was busy brushing fine dust from the slide of the Nomad 2, fingers steady, deliberate. Around them, a few young Marines began filming, their laughter bubbling into the dry wind. Ghost, his 6-year-old German shepherd, tensed beside the bench, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The dog's hackles rose, his amber eyes fixed on Brett. Ethan placed a hand gently on Ghost's back. "Easy," he murmured. Maya, standing behind her father, felt her pulse hammer in her ears. She hated this. hated seeing him surrounded, mocked, filmed like a sideshow. Yet when she caught his profile, calm, unshaken, something inside her twisted. He wasn't embarrassed. He looked free. Brett stepped closer, resting a hand on the shooting table, close enough that Maya could see the faint tremor in his left leg where the metal pin lay hidden. "Tell you what, old-timer," he said, lowering his voice for maximum theatrical effect. "You hit that steel out there. 2,800 meters. One shot. You miss, you pack up your junk and clear this range." He turned to the growing crowd, raising his voice. "What do you say, folks? Fair test for a legend." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. The onlookers, half curious and half bloodthirsty, lifted their phones higher. The desert became a stage. Ethan, the relic. Brett, the ringmaster. From the side booth, Sergeant Dana Keene approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with sunburnt skin and copper hair tied in a tight bun. Her fatigues were faded, her tone even sharper. "Lieutenant, that's not regulation procedure," she said firmly. Brett flashed her a grin that never reached his eyes. "Relax, Sergeant. Just a friendly demonstration for the kids." Dana's jaw flexed. She'd seen that look before, the arrogance of men who mistook humiliation for leadership. She gave Ethan a brief nod, silent respect from one soldier to another, before stepping back. Maya noticed it, her throat tightening with something like gratitude. Ethan stood, straightening his back. His shadow fell long across the shooting bench. The sun burned white behind him, catching the edges of his grey hair like silver threads. He holstered the Nomad 2, eyes on the distant glint of the target plate far beyond the canyon ridge. "You think you can hit it?" Brett taunted. Ethan finally looked at him, expression unreadable. "I don't think," he said quietly. "I remember." He lifted the pistol again, aligning it with the horizon. "The wind's still my oldest friend." The words rolled out steady as his heartbeat. Around them, the laughter faltered. The desert fell still, as if the earth itself leaned in to listen. The midday sun pressed down on the range until the air itself seemed to hum. Heat shimmered off the steel targets, distorting them into silver mirages. Lieutenant Brett Lawson had his sleeves rolled high, his veins standing out like cords as he reached for the Nomad 2 on the shooting bench. He gave Ethan a hard look, half challenge, half contempt, before snatching the gun up. The metal was heavier than he expected, almost unnaturally balanced, the barrel sleek but cold, as if it remembered things it shouldn't. "Feels like a brick," he sneered. He gripped the pistol, pulled the slide, and was startled when it locked halfway, the recoil spring groaning. The weapon jerked forward with a violent snap, nearly throwing the gun from his hands. The crowd gasped. A few laughed nervously. Brett's cheeks flushed red. "What the hell? This thing's rigged wrong," he muttered, rubbing his wrist. Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of someone used to command. "It's not wrong. It's balanced to counter a left crosswind drift." His eyes didn't leave Brett. "The barrel twists opposite standard rifling. Counter-spin design. I built it in Fallujah, 2004. Wind out there didn't forgive mistakes." The name Fallujah hit the air like a hammer. The laughter died. One of the men at the back, a grey-bearded veteran with faded tattoos on his forearms, stopped cleaning his rifle mid-motion. "Fallujah?" he echoed, his voice rasped by years of sand and cigarettes. His name tag read Harris, retired sergeant, early 60s, thin but strong, his weathered face creased with the memories of too many deployments. He stared at Ethan as if seeing a ghost. "You were with the 3rd Recon, weren't you? Cole from Bravo Company?" Ethan nodded once, almost reluctantly. A ripple went through the small group of older shooters who had been quiet until now. Maya, standing behind her father, looked around and saw the shift, the smirks fading, the curiosity dawning. For years, she'd only known her father as a quiet mechanic who fixed rifles in the back of their small workshop, who refused to talk about the medals tucked away in a dusty drawer. Now she was realizing that silence wasn't weakness, it was memory. Her chest tightened with something between pride and shame. a weight she hadn't expected. Ghost sat obediently beside Ethan's leg, but even he seemed to sense the change, tail tapping the dirt once in silent acknowledgement. Brett, struggling to recover, forced out a laugh that cracked halfway through. "So what? You built a fancy gun 20 years ago? Doesn't make it better than modern tech." He placed the Nomad 2 down a little too quickly, as if afraid of it. Ethan didn't respond. He simply reached forward, turned the pistol sideways, and pressed a small brass button hidden near the trigger guard. The upper slide shifted minutely, locking into alignment. "That's the harmonic stabilizer," Ethan said softly. "Keeps the barrel from climbing under long-distance recoil. Without it, you'd break your wrist trying to fire." A hush fell again. Harris crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "You were the one who made that shot," he murmured, almost to himself. "The one across the riverbank. They said nobody could have done it." Ethan's gaze flickered, haunted for a moment, then he lowered the weapon. "We did what we had to," he said. Brett's arrogance faltered. Maya's heartbeat pounded in her ears. The desert seemed smaller now, quieter. For the first time, she saw her father not as an old man clinging to relics, but as a soldier carved by storms the others couldn't imagine. She felt pride swelling, tentative but real. Ethan holstered the Nomad 2, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. "Now," he said, his tone even, "let's see if the old tools still remember how to sing." The sound of engines broke the tense quiet. A matte black SUV rolled across the dusty lot and stopped near the firing line, its tires grinding over gravel. The driver's door opened and a man in a dark uniform stepped out, his posture straight as a blade. Colonel Marcus Rivers, in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, had a clean-shaven face lined with experience and authority. His steel-grey eyes scanned the crowd with surgical precision. He carried the aura of someone who had spent decades giving orders in places where hesitation meant death. The silver oak leaves on his collar caught the sunlight as he walked directly toward Ethan. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers following like wind through dry grass. Rivers halted 2 feet from Ethan and snapped into a salute so sharp it cut through the murmurs. "Master Sniper Ethan Cole," he said, voice resonant but controlled, the kind that carried across battlefields. Brett froze mid-step, color draining from his face. The onlookers fell silent. Even Ghost, lying beside the bench, lifted his head, ears pricking. Ethan hesitated a moment before returning the salute. Slower, older, but still precise. "Colonel Rivers," he replied, his tone low and even. The exchange felt like an echo from another life. "Didn't expect to see you here," Ethan added. Rivers smiled faintly, though there was respect beneath the restraint. "Nor did I expect to find you proving a point to rookies." Maya stood speechless. Her father had always avoided the subject of his service, claiming there was nothing worth remembering. But now, a decorated officer was saluting him in front of everyone. Her confusion swelled with pride, and for the first time, she saw how every quiet habit of his, the discipline, the stillness, the way he treated wind like a living thing, came from something far greater than she'd understood. She felt her throat tighten, but she couldn't look away. Rivers turned to Brett, whose composure crumbled beneath the weight of realization. "Lieutenant Lawson," the colonel said, his tone like cold iron. "Do you have the faintest idea who this man is?" Brett stammered, "Sir, I—" But Rivers cut him off with a glare. "You just mocked the man who wrote the doctrine on long-range wind compensation used in every sniper manual since 2006. The murmurs grew. The older veterans exchanged glances, recognition dawning. Rivers gestured toward the Nomad 2. "That weapon isn't an antique. It's a prototype he designed after Fallujah. It saved 7 men in one night. One shot through 3 concrete walls." The crowd gasped. Sergeant Harris whispered something under his breath, reverent. Brett's jaw worked soundlessly. Ethan shifted uneasily, as if the attention embarrassed him more than the mockery had. "I didn't save anyone," he said quietly. "The wind just carried true that night." Rivers shook his head. "You never change, Cole." Still humble to a fault, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture both of camaraderie and respect. I came here to brief the training staff, not to walk into a history lesson. But since we're here, let's remind them what precision really looks like. Brett lowered his gaze, the swagger gone, replaced by a stunned shame that tightened his throat. Maya's eyes glistened. She finally understood why her father never needed to boast. His deeds had already spoken louder than words ever could. Around them, the desert wind stirred again, brushing across Ethan's hair like an old friend returning after a long silence. The afternoon light in Nevada burned white and unforgiving. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the heat distorting the air like water ripples over the horizon. At the edge of the firing range, Ethan Cole lowered himself to the bench with a quiet stiffness that came from years of wear rather than weakness. Ghost, his grey-coated German shepherd, 6 years old, sat faithfully by his left side, panting softly, amber eyes locked on his master. The dog's ears twitched at every whisper, every metallic click around them. Maya Cole, standing just behind, watched her father move with a grace that was both mechanical and reverent, every gesture deliberate, no motion wasted. The wind stirred her hair across her face, and she realized her hands were trembling. Somewhere deep inside, she prayed for a miracle she didn't fully believe in. Across the range, Colonel Marcus Rivers had taken position behind a spotting scope, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the sand. The colonel's voice, calm and controlled, carried faintly over the distance. "Wind, 10 knots crosswise. Just 2 clicks left." Ethan didn't look up. His weathered fingers moved over the custom dial on the Nomad 2's scope, his eyes already reading the mirage patterns rippling above the ground. Around them, the crowd, dozens of shooters, veterans, and spectators, had fallen silent. Even Lieutenant Brett Lawson, who had stood mocking earlier, now hovered several paces back, his jaw tight and color drained from his face. The bravado that once gleamed in him was gone, replaced by a strange mixture of awe and dread. Ethan drew a single cartridge from the leather pouch beside him. The casing glinted dull gold under the sunlight. The bullet, long and slender, carried a faint engraving near the tip. Memento. He had loaded it himself years ago, the last of a set designed for impossible distances. Ghost gave a low whine, sensing the gravity in the air. Ethan reached down and brushed the dog's neck, his hand steady, voice low enough only for him to hear. "One more time, boy. Let's see if the wind still remembers us." The pistol's slide locked with a satisfying click, the kind that echoed memory rather than sound. Maya pressed a hand over her heart. Her father's face, hardened by decades of silence, now looked calm, almost peaceful. Colonel Rivers whispered a single word: "Ready." Ethan exhaled slowly, shoulders rising, then still. The desert waited. A breath. A heartbeat. Then, crack. The explosion ripped through the air like thunder off canyon walls. The recoil rocked Ethan's arm, but his stance absorbed it effortlessly. A plume of dust lifted from the muzzle, curling like smoke into the dry wind. The bullet vanished into the heat haze, its path invisible, its sound devoured by distance. 85 seconds passed. No one spoke. The silence became unbearable. A young recruit near the back swallowed hard, the sound oddly loud. Maya felt tears blur her vision. Brett stared through binoculars, lips moving in a silent count. And then, ping. The faint metallic note returned from the far ridge, thin but undeniable. Colonel Rivers straightened abruptly, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Through his scope, the target plate shimmered, dead center, a perfect impact. He turned to the crowd, voice hushed with reverence. Hit confirmed, 2,800 meters. The range erupted into noise, cheers, gasps, the sound of boots stomping dust. But Ethan didn't move. He simply exhaled, lowering the Nomad 2, eyes distant. Ghost barked once, sharp and proud. Maya ran forward, tears streaming down her face as she threw her arms around him. Ethan smiled faintly, a rare, quiet curve of his lips. "Told you," he whispered. The wind never forgets. The echo of the ping still lingered when the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Dust rose in the hot Nevada wind as voices merged into one wild cheer. Lieutenant Brett Lawson stood frozen, binoculars dangling from his hands. His pulse hammered in his throat, and the world around him blurred. He had mocked a legend, turned a man's lifetime of skill into a punchline, and now every eye on the range looked at him, not as a leader, but as a fool. His knees trembled, and before he realized it, they hit the dirt. He stared down at his hands, strong, youthful, and shaking, and for the first time, they felt useless. The sun beat against his face, highlighting the sweat and shame mixed on his skin. When he finally looked up, Colonel Marcus Rivers was walking toward him with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who understood the weight of silence better than shouting. Rivers' expression was carved in stone. His uniform clung tight to his broad shoulders, the silver insignia gleaming coldly in the desert light. He stopped before Brett, his shadow swallowing the younger man whole. "Stand up, Lieutenant," he said, voice even but deadly quiet. Brett obeyed, shoulders sagging. "Do you understand what you've just witnessed?" Rivers asked. Brett swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "No," Rivers said, his tone cutting like glass. "You don't. What you saw wasn't luck. That was mastery born from decades of discipline, from nights spent breathing dust and fear while you were still learning how to salute. And you tried to humiliate that." Rivers stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Brett could hear. "Every range has its ghosts, Lawson. Be grateful one of them still walks among us." Ethan Cole approached quietly, Nomad 2 resting in his calloused hands, his face unreadable. The wind pulled at his grey hair, catching the faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Colonel," he said softly, "it's done." Rivers turned to him, his sternness softening into something like reverence. "Yes, Master Sniper," he replied, nodding. Ethan shook his head faintly. "I'm just a man who listens to the wind. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone." He looked at Brett, whose face was pale and drawn, every trace of arrogance gone. Ethan's eyes were calm, not angry, just steady, like the horizon. "We forget too easily," he said, voice low but carrying, "that the wind never gets old. It only changes direction." Maya Cole, standing nearby, pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened as pride swelled in her chest. She had never seen her father look taller, though he hadn't moved an inch. She ran forward, wrapping her arms around him. Ethan stiffened for a second, unused to open affection, then let his arm fall gently over her shoulders. Ghost, sensing the release of tension, barked once, deep, sharp, commanding, and the sound rolled across the range like a gun salute. The crowd cheered again, louder this time. Some of the older veterans saluted, others simply nodded, understanding that they had just witnessed something that would outlive them. Rivers faced the onlookers and raised his hand for silence. "Remember this day," he said, "not for the shot, but for the lesson. Respect isn't given by age or rank, it's earned, and today you've all seen why." His gaze fell once more on Brett. "Learn from it, Lieutenant. Pride can teach you nothing. Humility will teach you everything." Brett nodded, voice breaking. "Yes, sir." He turned to Ethan, eyes glistening. "Sir, I'm sorry." Ethan placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Then we're even," he said quietly. "The wind forgives quicker than men do." As the last applause faded, the sun dipped lower, turning the sky to molten gold. Ethan holstered the Nomad 2, his face calm, unburdened. The wind swept gently across the desert floor, warm, familiar, eternal. The first light of dawn spilled over the Nevada hills, washing the desert in pale gold. The air was cool now, soft after yesterday's fire, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Ethan Cole sat at the crest of a rocky ridge, legs crossed, the Nomad 2 laid across his knees like an offering. His lined face was peaceful, illuminated by the sunrise, Each wrinkle seemed carved by stories that no one had asked to hear. Below him, the range was quiet, littered with the footprints and shell casings of the day before. Maya Cole, still wearing her father's old canvas jacket, climbed the short slope beside him, her hair tousled from the wind, cheeks pink from the cold. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling up like ghosts. Ghost trotted behind her, the 6-year-old German shepherd moving with slow dignity after a long night. His grey coat caught the morning light, and he settled down beside Ethan, resting his head on the man's boot. Maya handed her father a mug and sat beside him. For a long time, they watched the sun rise in silence, listening to the faint calls of distant hawks. She finally broke the quiet. "It's everywhere," she said softly. "The video. Everyone's talking about you." Ethan didn't look surprised. "I figured they would," he said, his voice low, roughened by age but calm. "They like noise. It's what the world remembers best." He took a sip of coffee, the steam fogging his glasses for a moment. "But noise fades. The wind stays." Maya looked at him carefully, her expression torn between pride and confusion. "You could have told me," she whispered, "about who you were, about what you did." Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Would it have made you love me more?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "Just differently." The faint hum of an approaching vehicle drifted up the hill. A government SUV stopped near the base, and Sergeant Dana Keene stepped out, her auburn hair glowing like copper in the early light. She looked tired, but her posture was straight as ever. "Morning, sir," she called, her voice steady. "Colonel Rivers asked me to give you this." She handed him a sealed envelope. Ethan opened it slowly, reading the neatly typed letter, a formal commendation reinstating his honorary status in the Corps. Beneath the letter was a single line in Rivers' handwriting. "For the man who never missed the target, even when no one was watching." Ethan smiled faintly. "Tell the colonel I appreciate the thought," he said. Dinah nodded. "He figured you'd say that." Her eyes softened. "You're a quiet legend, sir." She turned and left without another word, her boots crunching over gravel as the SUV drove off, trailing dust. Maya leaned closer. "So, what will you do now?" Ethan set the Nomad 2 gently beside him. "I'll teach you," he said simply. "Not how to shoot, how to listen." She smiled, eyes glistening. "To the wind?" "To everything," he answered. Ghost's ears perked up as a breeze stirred across the ridge, carrying warmth through the cold dawn. Ethan tilted his head slightly, feeling it brush across his face. "You see," he said, almost to himself, "I never shot to prove I could hit. I shot to remember what shouldn't be forgotten: loyalty, silence, and the weight of what's right." The wind whispered past, lifting the corner of the commendation letter and sending it fluttering into the sun. Maya rested her head on his shoulder, and Ghost pressed closer. Together, they watched the desert awaken, a family bound by quiet pride, by memory, and by the sound of the wind that never stopped moving. When the wind whispered across the Nevada ridge that morning, it felt like more than nature. It felt like grace. Some call it skill, others call it destiny. But maybe it was simply God reminding us that faith and humility still move mountains. In a world that celebrates noise, sometimes the quiet hearts, steady, patient, faithful, carry His miracles. The story of one old soldier and the wind teaches us that belief never fades. It only changes direction. If this moment touched you, share it with someone who still believes in purpose. Leave a comment about your own miracle and subscribe to join this journey of hope and redemption. May God bless you, protect your home, and keep your faith as strong and enduring as the wind that never stops moving.